Missy, that was where I was going to sit. Hey ho, I'm Rachel from Miss Daisy Sewing and this here is Missy. And today she's going to be the star of the show and we're going to make her a new costume. So Missy has quite an elaborate wardrobe. I'm not going to lie, she has more fancy dress options than I do. We do quite well on the sort of fancy dress sort of dog show circuit. So I like to do something different each year. And at my niece and nephew's suggestion, we're going to make her her own like little suit of armour. Not like complete plate mail, more sort of a ranger, sort of Lord of the Rings, Redwall-esque suit of armour is sort of what we're thinking. The kids have drawn me up some ideas and they are fantastic, by the way. And I'm going to use some books I got for my Christmas to give me some ideas and advice on how to use foam, because we're going to make, it's got to be lightweight. So we're going to use foam to do the sort of the plate mail sections. And I've got some pleather for the sort of leather sections is the idea. So yeah, without further ado, let's get out in the sunshine and try and figure this out. So this is what my niece came up with. So I did the base sketches and she sort of built the armour on top. And she was the one who came up with the idea of using sort of leather. So I like the idea of sort of plate on the back and then the leather on the underside. I also like this sort of helmet with this sort of spiky, sort of Romanesque fringe. I think it's great. The chainmail on the tail I love, but Missy absolutely would not put up with that. So you can't do the chainmail tail. And then for my nephew, this is what he came up with. So I just sketched out rough sort of shapes and then he sort of did his design on them. So I love this sort of triangle design on the shoulder here. And he also wanted like sort of depth and texture. So he sort of put like a sort of star here and things and then the sort of almost sort of filigree on the legs. So I'm not sure how I'm going to bring these in, but I definitely want to bring in these diamonds. I think that is fantastic. Here I am putting the final touches to the sketch for what I want. I'm going with that leather underside and then a plate top. The idea being that I want this armour to look like it was designed for a dog. I also added in like a little skirt at the back. I wanted to sort of bring in more Redwall elements, a sort of slightly more medieval look to it, and that would include a sort of underlayer to the plate mail. All of Missy's costumes are based off of existing sort of dog items. In this case it's a cool coat, and here I am just sort of drafting it out. It's a bit hard to see in the sunshine, but I'm drafting out the pattern pieces and then I'm going to use that as a template for the actual armour. I want to take a moment to just really appreciate the Cosplay Crash Course book, in that in its section about cosplay for pets, it really highlights the most important thing is the animal's comfort, and that is the case for everything I make with Missy. And the last thing you're seeing me do here is folding all of the pattern pieces in half, and then I'm cutting out based on one side, and this is just to try and get everything nice and symmetrical. As I've said before, I hoard all my old patterns, so I'm repurposing the bottom part of the pirate outfit just to make it more of a vest on the bottom side rather than that narrow strap. I was going to measure her helmet, but somebody has had too much sun. Yes, sweetie. I realised straight away that the foam wasn't actually wide enough to match the width of the armour, so I was going to have to cut it into two parts, which actually added quite a nice seam on the back that I was going to build into the sort of plate design. And then flicking through the books here, looking at how to sort of do that shoulder part, and in the end just decided to sort of cut a wedge and I would wing it later on. I then cut the pleather into strips, and you can sort of see me stacking them into slightly narrower bands to match the shape of the underside. The final part of the project was then sorting out the helmet. I'm not going to lie, there was a lot of bribery involved, and I just had to keep my patience and slowly work out what sort of shape I wanted for this. You can also sort of see me working on the greaves here, just by draping the leather on her legs. These were going to be a hit and miss. She can be quite funny about stuff on her legs, but we'll wait and see. Here I am making those little triangles that I mentioned earlier that I wanted. And I'm just sort of measuring an inch either side and snipping along to get them nice and even. Whilst I assemble all of these triangles onto the armour, I thought I'd explain to you very quickly about my inspiration behind this. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a huge Redwall fan, and I love the idea of animals fighting in armour. I couldn't find a lot of official imagery of this, so this has just been living rent-free in my head clearly for years. Particularly the sort of badgers. Mossflower was the first book I read, and Boar the Badger really just sank like a lead weight fruit jelly. So we're back to the sewing machine, and you can sort of see that I'm stacking the pleather as I'm sewing. When I looked at leather armour, that just seems to be the way that the pieces have been assembled predominantly. And now starting to assemble things. First of all, we're trimming down that pleather piece into the shape of the front of the armour, and then out came the glue gun. First of all, I'm sort of assembling those shoulder parts. You can sort of see I'm using pegs to try and hold it together whilst the glue dries. And then I'm gluing that sort of top and bottom of the plate area. After that, we're getting the helmet pieces organised. I want to sort of tidy up around those ear bits, which is why these extra pieces are being added. And then it's sort of building that box on the top, which is what's going to hold the bristles in the end. And then it was getting all of those little triangles on. I sort of had to take my time to make sure I got them nice and neat, and I was constantly taking breaks when working on other parts whilst it dried. But yeah, overall really pleased with how those came out. And then it was getting the spray paint on, obviously in a very well ventilated area, it being the picnic bench in my back garden. I was originally quite nervous about the shade of grey that I'd picked. There wasn't much choice in the store, but I was actually really happy with it in the end. And then onto the part that was really going to make or break this project, which was adding in all of the extra painting details. I wanted to add some depth around all of those spikes using a black. It would also add a more weathered effect, and I repeated this on the helmet as well, in all of those sort of little cracks and crevices. Don't panic with the white here. I wanted to have a high contrast on those little triangles, and then I'm using the sponge here because I wanted this to look like it was painted on metal, to have that slightly inconsistent coat with some little bits of grey popping through. Whilst that dried, I then did some more weathering on the leather, this time using a sort of dark brown, mostly around the edges and under that layering. Once I was happy that white was dried, you can then see I'm marking on a checkerboard, and then I'm adding in some black now with that sponge, again to get that painted on look. At this point I had decided that this project would double up for another event later in the year, which is why I really wanted to bring in the checkerboard. I also think it's just fun and gives it a little bit more colour and texture. So that's all painted. I've given it a spray with just a matte top coat, and really pleased with it all. The weathering, particularly on the leather, has turned out really nice, and I really like how the checkers turned out. I want it to look like it's been painted on beaten metal, so not perfect, and I'm really happy with the texture we've got from using the little sponge. And my little freehand checker on the helmet looks great too. So, need to add the bristles on the helmet, and then it's going to be assembling everything. For the bristles, I decided to use a little brush. That way they were already sort of neatly gathered together. And then I was the victim of my own impatience when I trimmed them off and the glue hadn't quite set. So you can see me desperately trying to get it looking nice again. After that, I decided to sew rather than glue that leather bit onto the sort of foam top. I used a straight stitch and then a zigzag stitch to try and get that as firm as possible. This was my first opportunity to do a proper fit check with Missy, and I kind of had a feeling that that underside was going to be slightly too big, so I just sort of marked it out roughly and trimmed it before sort of reinforcing the edges again. I decided to go down the road of Velcro for the fastening. For the leather side, I just simply stitched it on. Then I quickly measured it on Missy so that I could get the placement right before gluing the Velcro onto the foam side. For the greaves, I used a double-sided Velcro and then just stitched those on the side. For the final touches, I up-purposed this old outfit of Missy's, and you can see I'm just sort of trying to salvage as much as I can, the idea being to make a skirt and a sort of snood for around her neck. I got fancy on the snood and finished it off with a French seam. You won't see me do these very often, I just find them quite time consuming. For the skirt, I actually put in a pleat in the middle to help sort of fan out the end, but then also get it nice and narrow because I wanted it to come out below the Velcro join. Whilst not on par with that of Martin the Warrior, Missy's quest was no less adventurous. We sailed upon the Firth of Forth and underneath its iconic bridges as we made our way to Inchcolm Island and its absolutely beautiful abbey. Whilst they fitted in the test fit, the greaves will need a little bit of reworking as they fell off the minute she tried to walk. But apart from that, I was delighted with how the fit came out. She got loads of attention from the other people who were out visiting the island that day, and I honestly don't think we could have asked for more perfect weather for it. Missy was very comfortable in the outfit and could move absolutely fine. It didn't hamper her at all. And she was quite happy to have it taken on and off. Overall, I'm absolutely delighted with how this came out. We've got some jousting events this year where I know she's going to blend right in, and I'm just really pleased that my first proper attempt at foam has actually worked out in the way I envisioned it to, so I will take that as a win. I hope you had fun joining us on our quest, and I'll see you on our next one. Cheerio! If today's adventure has left you hungry for more Redwall, you can join myself and my good friend Amy at Bookish Cooking as we partake in deeper never pie in our own Redwall feast.